The Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast is back for another episode. Join Marc S. Ryan, a veteran health plan and health technology executive, as he explores the world of healthcare.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast, where we navigate the maze of healthcare policy and economics each week. My name is Marc Ryan, and thanks to everyone for listening in. This week's episode is titled The Exchange Enrollment Debate. The truth is somewhere in the middle. We'll take our usual 3 breaks today. Today, I want to talk about one of the most contentious healthcare debates of 2026. Why has Affordable Care Act exchange enrollment fallen so sharply? And as is often the case in healthcare policy, there are 2 very different answers circulating out there. The Trump administration and conservative organizations such as the Paragon Health Institute say a significant portion of the decline reflects something we should welcome: the removal of improper, fraudulent, or essentially phantom enrollment. On the other side, organizations such as Kaiser Family Foundation, a healthcare policy group, as well as Democrats, argue that the central story is much simpler. The enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies expired, premiums went up, deductibles went up, and millions of people could no longer afford their coverage. My view, the truth as usual is somewhere in the middle. And I think understanding that middle ground is important because both sides are making arguments that contain some truth, while both sides sometimes ignore facts that don't fit their preferred narrative. So let's start with some background. First, a refresher on how the subsidies worked. Under the Affordable Care Act, people purchasing coverage through the exchanges can receive federal premium tax credits based largely on their household income. Before the pandemic era changes, premium assistance was generally available to people with household incomes between 100% and 400% of the federal poverty level, subject to other eligibility requirements. People with lower incomes could receive additional cost-sharing reduction subsidies, particularly those at or below 250% of the federal poverty level when they selected qualifying silver plans. Then COVID changed the equation. Congress temporarily enhanced the premium tax credits. Those enhanced subsidies did 2 important things. First, they increased the amount of assistance available to many lower-income consumers already receiving premium subsidies. Second, they eliminated the traditional 400% of poverty subsidy cliff. That meant people above 400% of the federal poverty level could also qualify for some premium assistance if the cost of the benchmark plan exceeded a specified percentage of household income. Those enhanced subsidies were extended twice and ultimately remained in place through the end of 25, but they expired on January 1, 26. And that is where the current controversy really begins. Because when those subsidies disappeared, millions of people didn't necessarily lose eligibility for an ACA plan. They simply lost enough financial assistance to make the plan affordable for their income level. And those are 2 very different things. Let's look at what happened. According to Healthcare Policy Group, KFF, effectuated ACA marketplace exchange enrollment fell from approximately 22.1 million people in 2025 to 19.2 million in February 26. That's roughly a 3 million person decline, or about 13%. But the enrollment number only tells part of the story. KFF found that average premium payments for marketplace enrollees increased by approximately 58%, from $113 per month to $178. And average deductibles increased by about 37%, or more than $1,000, reaching approximately $3,786 a year. That is a remarkable change in 1 year. Think about what that means for a family. You may have had coverage in 25. You may still technically qualify for an ACA plan in 26, but suddenly your monthly premium is substantially higher, as is your deductible. And if you move to a cheaper bronze plan to reduce the premium hike, you may now face a deductible approaching $4,000 before the plan pays for most services. That is coverage. but it may not feel like affordable access to healthcare. And this is where I think the affordability argument is extremely compelling. We know how consumers respond when insurance becomes too expensive. Some people drop coverage entirely. Others move into plans with higher deductibles. Others continue paying the premium, but avoid actually using the insurance because they cannot afford the out-of-pocket costs. And that last point is particularly important. Having an insurance card in your wallet isn't the same thing as having affordable access to healthcare. The policy objective should not simply be maximizing the number of people who can say they are insured. It should be getting people into coverage that they can actually afford to use. And there is another important piece of evidence. The experience of the state-based exchanges is revealing. States that implemented their own additional subsidies when the federal enhanced subsidies expired generally experienced smaller enrollment declines. And New Mexico, which replaced the lost federal enhanced subsidies with state assistance, actually saw effectuated enrollment increase. That doesn't prove that every person who left an exchange plan did so because of the subsidy expiration, but it certainly makes it difficult to argue that affordability wasn't a major factor. If you increase the consumer's premium dramatically, some consumers will leave. That's not really a surprise. It's basic economics. And it isn't unique to the individual market. We've seen the same phenomenon in employer-sponsored insurance. Employers face higher healthcare costs. They respond by increasing employee contributions, increasing deductibles, narrowing networks, or changing benefits. Employees then respond by choosing cheaper coverage or sometimes deciding that the coverage is simply too expensive. So I don't buy the argument that the expiration of the enhanced subsidies somehow created the entire affordability problem in American healthcare. It didn't. Healthcare was already becoming increasingly expensive. The subsidies masked some of that underlying problem for millions of exchange consumers. Once the subsidies disappeared, consumers suddenly saw much more of the real price. And that is a very important distinction. So there is a very strong affordability argument behind the enrollment decline. But if we stop there, we're missing another very important part of the story, because there is substantial evidence that something else was happening in the ACA exchanges at the same time. And that brings us to the issue of improper enrollment. With that, let's take our first break. When we come back, we'll look at the fraud and phantom enrollment argument and why I think the critics of the ACA also have a legitimate point. Be right back.
Health plans and insurance are confusing. Our healthcare system is in dire need of reform. Health policy expert Marc Ryan tackles both issues in his book, The Healthcare Labyrinth. It is both a guide to navigating health plans and fixing American health insurance. Marc dives deep into how health plans and the American health insurance system operate. He then outlines a comprehensive reform agenda for the system as a whole, including pricing, emphasizing health and care management, and ensuring affordable access to health coverage and a private delivery model. Marc is a bit of an unconventional Republican in that he believes affordable access is the morally right thing to do, and that it is also fiscally prudent for our nation. Learn more about Marc's book, The Healthcare Labyrinth, at healthcarelabyrinth.com or search at leading bookseller websites. Available in print, ebook, and audiobook forms.
Welcome back to this edition of the Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast. My name is Marc Ryan, and we hope you are enjoying this episode. This week, we're talking about the very complicated story behind the decline in AC exchange enrollment. It's a big debate happening right now. And now we get to the other side of the argument. I just outlined how I agreed with some of Democrats and the Kaiser Family Foundation when they argue that the expiration of the premium subsidies, in fact, did cause some of that enrollment decline. But organizations such as the Paragon Health Institute have spent years examining what they describe as improper enrollment in the ACA exchanges. Its latest analysis estimates that approximately 6.2 million 2026 exchange signups may have been improperly enrolled, representing about 27% of all exchange signups. Paragon estimates that these enrollments could result in as much as $25 billion in improper federal subsidy payments. Now, let's be careful here. That is Paragon's estimate. It is not the same thing as CMS determining that 6.2 million people committed fraud. Paragon's methodology essentially looks at enrollment in the 100% to 150% of federal poverty level income category and compares that enrollment with estimates of the population that could plausibly be eligible in that income range. There are assumptions in the methodology, so I wouldn't present 6.2 million as a government certified fraud count. But I also wouldn't dismiss the underlying concern either, because there is considerable evidence that the exchange system developed serious program integrity problems. Here's the fundamental issue. When the enhanced subsidies were at their maximum, some consumers, especially in the 100 to 150% category, could obtain exchange coverage with no premium at all. And that creates an unusual incentive structure. If you are a consumer and somebody says, I can get you health insurance and it won't cost you a thing, that's a pretty easy decision. But it also creates an opportunity for an unscrupulous broker or enrollment intermediary. A broker may have a financial incentive to enroll a person, even if the person doesn't fully understand what is happening. There have been documented concerns about unauthorized enrollments, income manipulation, automatic re-enrollment, and brokers using consumer information to enroll people in coverage. And that's where the term ghost or phantom enrollee comes into the discussion of the exchanges. Paragon has pointed to the extraordinarily high number of exchange enrollees who had no medical claims during the year. In 2024, it estimated that nearly 12 million exchange enrollees, about 35%, had no medical claims whatsoever. Now, zero claims does not equal fraud. Let's make that absolutely clear. A healthy person can have insurance for an entire year and never submit a claim. But when you combine an enormous zero claims population with documented broker abuses, automatic re-enrollment, and very large subsidies, it certainly raises legitimate questions. And there's another behavioral issue. Even when there is no fraud whatsoever, free coverage can change behavior. If a consumer has to pay $150 a month, they have to make a conscious decision. Is this coverage worth $1,800 a year? If the premium is zero, that economic decision disappears. Someone may enroll simply because there is no downside. They may never learn the benefits. They may never establish a relationship with a physician. They may not even realize they have been enrolled. That doesn't necessarily make them fraudulent, but it does mean that enrollment statistics can become a poor proxy for actual healthcare coverage and engagement. This is where the political debate gets too simplistic. The left tends to emphasize the people who genuinely lost affordable coverage. The right tends to emphasize people who may never have legitimately belonged in the program. Both groups exist. There are legitimate people who are receiving enhanced subsidies and who could no longer afford their coverage after January 1, 26. And there were also people who were improperly enrolled in the system. So when somebody says the entire enrollment decline is because of fraud, I don't buy it. But when somebody says there was no meaningful improper enrollment problem, and this is entirely about the subsidies, I don't buy that either. Both can be true. And there's an even bigger question here. What happens to the exchange risk pool when millions of people make these decisions? Because this isn't simply a question of enrollment statistics. It has consequences for premiums, deductibles, insurers, and ultimately the people who remain in the market. That's what we'll explain after our second break. Be right back.
Lilac Software is proud to work with the Healthcare Labyrinth website to educate people on the healthcare system. At Lilac, we believe transparency is so important in healthcare. The healthcare system is opaque, and Lilac is trying to bring clarity to data and unleash the best member care, reduce costs, and improve outcomes. Our cloud-native payer platform revolutionizes data insights and analytics. Plans have all the data they need, but in silos locked away in point solutions. At Lilac, we solve the data fragmentation problem and help plans turn complex data into actionable insights, leading to greater operating leverage, tight cost controls, and healthier members. Health plans can improve STAR scores, reduce medical expense, drive revenue, and more. Quite simply, with Lilac, you can drive better business and health outcomes. Learn more at lilacsoftware.com.
Welcome back to this edition of the Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast. My name is Marc Ryan, and we hope you are enjoying this episode. This week, we're talking about the very complicated story and fiery debate behind the decline in ACA enrollment. Let's now take the next step. The risk pool matters. Health insurance works because people with different levels of healthcare needs are pooled together. Healthy people subsidize sick people. Young people subsidize older people. People who use very little healthcare help offset the costs of people who use a great deal. That is the fundamental insurance model. But when prices increase substantially, you have to worry about who leaves. If relatively healthy people say, I'm not paying $400 or $500 a month for this, and drop their coverage, while people with serious medical needs remain because they need the insurance, the risk pool gets worse. And when the risk pool gets worse, insurers have to price for that risk. That can mean higher premiums. And higher premiums can cause even more healthy people to leave. That is the classic adverse selection problem. We could therefore be entering a cycle in the individual market where affordability problems create enrollment losses worsen the risk pool, and a worsening risk pool puts additional upward pressure on premiums. And we already have another warning sign. Insurers are seeking substantial premium hikes for 2027. KFF reports that insurers have proposed a median premium increase of approximately 14% for 2027, following an even larger increase requested for 26. Insurers cite factors including medical cost growth, higher utilization, and prescription drug costs. So the exchange affordability problem isn't necessarily finished. It could become a continuing problem. And that's why I would have extended the enhanced subsidies. I would have extended the enhanced premium subsidies, but I would not have simply extended them exactly as they existed. I would have attached significant reforms. First, I think there should be stronger eligibility verification. Second, we need substantially better broker oversight. Third, we need stronger controls around unauthorized enrollment. Fourth, subsidy reconciliation needs to work better. And finally, I believe we should ask consumers to contribute something toward their coverage. Not necessarily a lot, but something, because there is a difference between affordable coverage and free coverage. If someone is extremely low income, that contribution might be $5 or $10 a month. For someone with higher income, it could be substantially more. The point is not to punish low-income Americans. The point is to create some degree of consumer engagement and accountability while maintaining affordability. But we shouldn't pretend subsidies solve healthcare inflation. And this is where I think the broader debate becomes especially important. Democrats are correct that the expiration of the enhanced subsidies caused a major affordability shock in the exchanges. But it is also wrong to suggest that the subsidies themselves caused the entire affordability crisis. They didn't. The underlying healthcare system has been becoming more expensive for years. Hospital prices have increased. Physician costs have increased. Prescription drug spending has increased demonstrably. Healthcare consolidation has changed negotiating leverage. Employers have experienced enormous healthcare cost increases, and consumers have increasingly been asked to absorb those costs through premiums and deductibles. The ACA subsidies essentially transfer more of those costs from consumers to taxpayers. That may be appropriate as a short-term policy to maintain access, but it's not a long-term healthcare cost strategy. If the underlying healthcare system becomes more expensive every year, we cannot simply respond by making the federal subsidy larger every year. Eventually, the taxpayer becomes the insurer of last resort for the entire healthcare inflation problem. That isn't sustainable. So where does that leave us? I think there's a reasonable path forward, one that doesn't require choosing between affordability and program integrity. We'll talk about that after our final break. Be right back.
The Healthcare Labyrinth is no ordinary website. It features news and commentary from one of the nation's leading healthcare policy and technology experts. Marc Ryan combs the internet for the latest healthcare news and publishes a news feed each weekday with summations and Marc's insights. Twice a week, Marc publishes a blog to go deep into a current issue. And of course, Marc hosts a podcast each week to delve even further. All of this is available at healthcarelabyrinth.com. Visit each day for the latest happenings in healthcare. As well, learn more about Marc's book, The Healthcare Labyrinth, at the website. That's healthcarelabyrinth.com, your go-to source for healthcare news.
Welcome back to the Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast. My name is Marc Ryan, and we hope you are enjoying this episode. This week, we're talking about the very complicated story behind the decline in ACA exchange enrollment. So let's wrap this podcast up. As I said before the break, I think there is a reasonable path forward, one that doesn't require choosing between affordability and program integrity. It shouldn't have to be an either or. But the exchange enrollment debate has become another example of the way American healthcare policy gets trapped in ideological arguments. One side says people lost coverage because Republicans allowed these subsidies to expire. The other side says people were fraudulently enrolled and we're finally cleaning up the rolls. I think both statements contains part of the truth. Millions of legitimate Americans face substantially higher premiums when the enhanced subsidies expired. The data on premiums and deductibles make that very difficult to dispute. At the same time, there is credible evidence that the exchange system developed serious program integrity problems. The solution is not to ignore either problem. It is to address both. Make coverage affordable enough that people can actually maintain it, but require meaningful eligibility verification, police brokers who enroll people without authorization, stop income manipulation, improve automatic re-enrollment safeguards, strengthen subsidy reconciliation, and hold insurers, brokers, and enrollment platforms accountable when they facilitate improper enrollment. But there's one more thing we have to do. We need to address the cost of American healthcare itself, because ultimately we cannot subsidize our way out of a healthcare system that costs too much. If a family needs a massive federal subsidy simply to make an insurance premium affordable, perhaps the deeper question isn't how much should the government subsidize the premium? Maybe the question is, why does the premium cost so much in the first place? That's where we have to start talking about hospital prices, provider consolidation, prescription drug costs, administrative waste, care management, and the enormous opportunity we have to shift the system toward prevention and primary care. Affordable universal access to healthcare has always been one of the central principles of my healthcare reform philosophy. But access isn't simply having an insurance card, as I pointed out. It means having coverage that people can afford. It means having a deductible they can realistically meet. It means being able to see a physician before a condition becomes a crisis. And it means having a healthcare system that doesn't require ever larger taxpayer subsidies simply to keep up with its own inflation and to keep the system afloat. So what's the bottom line? Here's my bottom line. The exchange enrollment decline is real. Affordability is a major reason, but improper enrollment is also a real problem. And pretending that one explanation completely eliminates the other doesn't help us solve anything. KFF's data shows a substantial decline in effectuated enrollment and dramatic increases in what consumers are paying for coverage. KFF currently estimates that average effectuated enrollment could settle around 17.5 million in 26, potentially several million below 25 levels. At the same time, Paragon's analysis estimates that roughly 6.2 million signups may be improper, although that is an analytical estimate rather than a government determination of fraud. Those numbers don't have to contradict each other. Some people left because they couldn't afford coverage. Some people were never legitimately enrolled. Some people probably enrolled but never used the coverage. And some people are still enrolled but are now sitting in plans with very high deductibles that make actually accessing healthcare difficult. That's the messy reality of the exchanges today. And as is so often the case in healthcare, the truth is always somewhere in the middle. The policy challenge is to build an exchange system that accomplishes two things at the same time: affordable coverage for people who genuinely need it, and program integrity so taxpayer dollars go to people who are actually eligible and actually enrolled. We shouldn't have to choose between those objectives. We should demand both. And then we need to go one step further and address the underlying cost of American healthcare so that subsidies aren't simply chasing prices upward year after year. That brings us back to the broader reforms I advocate: affordable universal access combined with price reform, better care management, stronger primary care, and a healthcare system focused much more aggressively on keeping people healthy rather than simply paying for increasingly expensive treatment after they become sick. That's it for today's episode of the Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with colleagues interested in healthcare policy, economics, and the increasingly complicated business of American healthcare. Until next time, stay curious, stay skeptical, and keep navigating the healthcare labyrinth with me. We will find our way out together. Again, I am Marc Ryan. This is the Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast. See you next week. Take care.
Thanks for joining Marc and the Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast. Go to healthcarelabyrinth.com each day for the latest healthcare news. See you next week on the next Healthcare Labyrinth Podcast.